On the second day of the siege, a Tiger tank rumbled down the street at the top of that bank over there. Now, Major Cain was down here on this piece of waste ground, armed with a Piat gun. Now, British troops hated these things. It was a botched piece of design. It was heavy, it was ungainly, it was inaccurate, and the shell it fired was virtually useless against all known sorts of German armour. And those were the good things about it. The bad thing was trying to cock it. You had to stand on the end like that and then pull it up to tighten the spring, which isn't so bad now because the spring's 60 years old and quite weak. But back then that would often take two guys. And then, once it was done, you had to seat the shell, which meant feeding it in like this. It's immensely fiddly even today, so what it must have been like when you had 50 tons of Tiger tank bearing down on you. Isn't bear thinking about. Cain managed to load the Piat by himself and take up position behind a little hut. He waited for the Tiger to be 30 yards away, took aim and fired. It was a good shot. The shell went right underneath the tank and blew up, causing no damage whatsoever. All it did was alert the crew inside to the fact that he was there. A shell from the tank's 88mm gun blew the hut to smithereens, but at the last second, Cain grabbed his Piat gun and ran for cover past the tank's machine gun to a laundry. And once he got there, he reloaded the Piat and got ready to fire it again. The second shot was as good as the first, but the effect was exactly the same as well. Nothing. So the tank turned its gun again and fired again. And this time it killed Cain's spotter, Lieutenant Ian Meitler. Now, at this point, a sane man would have got out of there. But you've got to remember, Cain had lost 100 of his men by this stage. He wasn't in the mood for getting out. So, as the dust cleared, no one could quite believe their eyes, because he was lying in completely open ground, facing down a Tiger tank.
I was close enough to see exactly what happened.
I think he altered his position to kneeling, and we could see in the distance a tank.
I was absolutely certain he was going to die there.
Kept on shouting, "Load, load," and firing at the tank.
He fired for a third time, and this time his shell hit the Tiger's only Achilles heel. He blew one of its tracks off, immobilizing it.
And you could see the track of the tank come away and lob on its sides.
Cain had no time to celebrate, though, because almost immediately another Tiger rolled into view on the road up there. He dived behind the wall of the laundry again, reloaded his Piat again, and then stepped out to take a shot at it. But he pulled the trigger a fraction of a second too soon. So the shell clipped the wall of the laundry and blew up just a few feet in front of his face.
There was a flash, and he immediately fell over.
And it was horrifying. When I got to him, his face was black, but totally black, and with little of spots of blood all the way around. What, 30, 40, 50, whatever it was. And he was saying, I'm blind, I can't see."
So several of his men carried him away to the copse, 10, 15 yards away.
I stayed with him no more than 6 or 7 paces, I shouldn't think, holding his hand.
It seemed like he was finished. But 45 minutes later, he was back. His sight had returned, and that was enough. The shrapnel wounds he would cope with.
And this chap came out of the copse with his face blackened. And he got down immediately on the Piat gun.
I was staggered, utterly staggered.
I thought, well, he must be a very brave man to be knocked out, probably, and then come back and take up the same position and still hit tanks.
I couldn't understand why such a brave man didn't say, well, I've had enough. He'd done his lot and still kept going.
But it was still firing when we left.
By the end of that day, day 2 of the siege, Cain, according to eyewitnesses, had destroyed 3 tanks. No one had ever done that before. He had begun to win his VC. This lump of bronze is only big enough to produce 80 more medals. But there's no need to panic about it running out just yet, because over the years it's become harder and harder to win a Victoria Cross. In the early days, simply whirling your sword at a heathen was often enough, but that changed toward the end of the First World War, and the figures back this up. In World War I, 634 medals were awarded, but in World War II, that dropped to just 182. The bar had been raised to an almost impossible height.